Well, greetings all. My name is Rory, and I'm coming to you here from Jakarta, here in our church. And I want to make a few comments about the Michael Brown debacle that's going on. I think you can go and do your own research and see there's pretty serious allegations coming against him. Serious in the sense that as a Christian, and in particular as a pastor, the sorts of behavior that he allegedly engaged in was inexcusable. Now, I'm coming at this from the perspective that in the early days of my ministry in my life, I really learned a lot from Dr. Michael Brown. In fact, he was maybe one of my favorite preachers or teachers during a time. And some of his earlier teachings were just powerful. Sermons were convicting, radical. It was just right on, stuff right on. Now that I go back and I listen to some of his earlier stuff, I won't find myself agreeing with everything, all of his perspectives and things like that. But still, you'll hear this sort of a challenge to wholehearted Christianity, to a true repentance. He deals with issues that in a lot of evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal types of churches, nobody's really dealing with. But for me, I noticed many, many years ago now, I noticed that something changed in his teaching and his preaching. In fact, it came to a point for me where I wouldn't follow him on Twitter. I didn't listen to his sermons. I wouldn't read his books anymore. The reason is, it's kind of hard to exactly put my finger on, but one of the things I noticed over the years is his sense of discernment seemed to be just completely off. Like in his earlier days, he was very sharp, evaluating the false ministries, the false preachers, the false prosperity gospel and all that stuff. He was very sharp, very good at discerning and speaking against those things. But I found as time went on, he seemed to be defending the indefensible. He seemed to have just a total lack of discernment in dealing with people like Hillsongs or dealing with people like Joseph Prince, who's not too far from where I'm at here in Jakarta, right over there in Singapore, the Hyper Grace camp. Although he wrote a book against Hyper Grace, he would interact and sit down and take photos together with the worst purporters of that heretical doctrine. So time and again, you would see Michael Brown, when it came down to some major issues, the cutting edge issues, not dealing with rabbis, not dealing with Islam, not dealing with LGBT issues. Those issues were easy. But when it came down to the nitty gritty of actual modern day church life, I would always find he was always on the wrong side of the issues, which was shocking to me because in earlier days, he was so sharp. And so I came to a point where I had some little mini debates with him, maybe on Twitter and that sort of thing. And I remember in one of the conversations, I was confronting him about the issue with Hillsongs, the issue with Joseph Prince, and I asked a question. What would Leonard Ravenhill say about this? What would David Wilkerson say about this? Because those were mentors of Dr. Michael Brown. He knew Leonard Ravenhill personally. He knew David Wilkerson personally. And, if it would have been either of those men in dealing with those issues, they would have been totally different from Michael Brown. But his response was, I should know because I knew them well personally, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, he knew them at a time and he was influenced them at a time. But he long ago left behind the mantle, the burden that they carried long ago. He lost the discernment. He lost the clarity. This was my perspective for many, many years now, not just something recently, many years. The nail in the coffin was the IHOP debacle and the way Michael Brown just completely mangled the whole thing. I mean, it was just nothing good coming out of this guy when it comes to the real nitty-gritty issues of calling out sin, dealing with false teachers, dealing with false teaching, etc. Well, I say all that to say, honestly, many times I've ached in my heart. I've mourned over this issue. And there's always this big question, what is it? What's wrong? How did he lose it? Or what happened? I remember there was one time there was a brother, I think a Malaysian brother, he was making these videos against Hyper Grace. And he told me he was going to make a video against Dr. Michael Brown and say, how did he creep in among us? Because he was saying, Dr. Michael Brown, on the surface, he appears to be with us, but in reality, he's always working undercurrents that work against the whole idea of righteousness and holiness and false doctrine, etc. I said, don't do it. I encourage him. I was convinced at the time, Michael Brown, I think he's just confused. I think he's a good brother. I think he intends well. I don't know how he lost the plot at some point. He's just kind of got this naivety about him when dealing with certain people, etc. Well, I think I know what the issue is now. I mean, I think the stuff that's the revelations that have come out recently, they make it abundantly clear that there were some real compromises. Now, even if the things that have recently come out, even if those are the only things, there was nothing else beyond that, that is enough. Those are serious compromises for a minister of the gospel that were never dealt with properly. There's none righteous, no, not one. Who is perfect in all of their word, thought, and deeds? No one. But it's one thing about saying, oh, you're casting stones. I'm not casting stones, but I'm saying you have to walk in the light. You have to walk in accountability. And apparently, allegedly, he didn't do that with this issue. In fact, he swept it under the carpet. In fact, even now he's coming out on the defensive. When you read his response, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, but I'm mortified. But, the reality is, read between the lines, he's defending himself. The way I see it is, this is just clarification for me of something that I've seen for nearly 2 decades now with Dr. Michael Brown. What went wrong with the great Dr. Michael Brown? Well, I think we can see it now. And God have mercy on us and help us. Don't hide sins. If you do fall into a sin, if you find yourself weak, don't just confess it to the Lord. I mean, sometimes you've got to confess before men. Go to a trusted spiritual leader, whoever you're accountable to, but don't sweep things under the carpet. Get things into the light. If not, it's going to come back to haunt you many years later. So may God use this to cause us to search our own hearts and our own lives, to put the fear of the Lord in us, and also see the devastating results of those little foxes that can destroy the vine. Because for me, although Michael Brown has done a lot of work as far as activism and LGBT issues, all these sorts of things, but he lost his edge. He lost his prophetic edge. He'll say some of the same things, but it doesn't have the power and the unction and that cutting edge that it had in the earlier days. And I think we can see why. So let's say he only did those few things that are reported in like Leroy's report or whatever. Yeah, but he didn't deal with it properly. It was hidden. It was covered over. And that is enough, in my opinion, to send an entire life and ministry off. It's not totally off. He's not teaching outright heresy or anything like that, but his judgment is blurred. His discernment is off, and he comes out time and time again on the wrong side of the issue. So may God help us to fear him, that our hearts would be right and our lives would be right. And anything that has happened with us or, that we have done, may God give the fear of the Lord, that we will deal with it properly and not try to sweep things under the carpet. God bless.